They have caught lightning in a bottle.
Pre-pandemic, we were at roughly, I think 25 million monthly active users. Today, we sit at around over 70 million monthly active users. Looking back, I don't think we knew anything about anything.
How come you guys are not thinking about monetization and then we'd come out of the meeting saying, wow, they're growing so fast?
Those, 5 years that we weren't making any money, these were probably the wins that, kept us going, right? Not a day that goes by when at least quiz is used in 150 distinct countries. Essentially summarizes make learning fun, bombarded with so much stimulating content. While we had built it for kids to use, it was actually teachers who were driving the adoption, right? Giving teachers a fun way to conduct an assessment with their kids, but letting them feed in the content.
Hi, everybody. Sanjay Swami here, and I'm here with Deepak, one of the co founders of what today is known as Quizizz. But when we met Deepak, he constituted 50% of the company, and his co founder Ankit was the other 50%, a company called WizenWorld. And we met them sometime in early February. They had this game. And then they came back 2 weeks later and said, well, there's this new thing we have started, and it seems to be getting some more traction. And we think you should take a look at it. And that was the start of an amazing journey we have had over the last 9.5 years, close to 10 years now. So, Deepak, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sanjay. Yeah, glad to be here.
So maybe we can start right there, Deepak, right? What got you and Ankit together, and what got you started? What was your initial motivation to be in this sector, and how have and maybe the first part of the journey of what led to Quizzes
Yeah,
itself.
sure. And I think, yeah, so me and Ankit, we actually met each other for the first time in college. It was quite a coincidence that, out of 800 kids, we got paired as roommates. And that's
This
when
is
we,
at Bits.
at BITS, yeah, at BITS Pilani. And we also happened to be in the same branch, which is also a nice coincidence. It doesn't usually happen. So yeah, we were together the whole 4 years in college. And I think, we both enjoyed, playing around with little apps, and we did projects together. And so I think that's how we initially got to know each other and knew each other for like 4 years in college, and it was around 2 years after we graduated. We were both working. I was at Amazon. Ankit was at a company called Opera Solutions, and uh, Ankit actually came to visit me, just generally, for a catch up. I was at Hyderabad, he was in Delhi. So, we hung out, and that's when, Ankit said, why don't, do you want to think about doing something together? And I was like, yeah, why not? Better, now is as good a time as any, I suppose. And I think looking back, I don't think we knew anything about anything. So we were just, probably pumped to build something. And at Amazon, definitely, like while I learned a lot from, my short time there, definitely not a place where you can build anything you want, pretty big company. So I think I looked forward to that. And so we actually didn't really have education as the only domain we wanted to be in. We actually explored a bunch of ideas. For the next couple of months we would just chat on the phone. And but interestingly, when we hit upon EdTech and thought about building something which you could essentially summarize as make learning fun, I think that idea just appealed to us. I think it felt like something we would enjoy building. We, looked at what was out there in the market, and it felt like there was a big need. Kids were being bombarded with so much, stimulating content, whether it's social media. So we never really felt there was a big risk or anything. I think that was one nice thing out of, sitting in interviews. I felt like, yeah, even after a year, I think I can pass an interview.
You can get a job there. Right.
So with that confidence, and just with the seed of an idea, we quit. And I think we knew that we didn't know much about this field. And I think one of the smart things we did early on was go to a school and just, use that as our test bed, right? So we would every week sort of build something and show it to a small group of kids there. And I think a lot of our learnings came from that actually, versus, sitting in your,
Mhm.
apartment or whatever and dreaming up big things, every week, just making little progress and showing it and seeing what worked, didn't work. But
Okay,
yeah.
so that was like sort of the early discovery, interacting with the end user, who was really the kids and so
Yeah.
on. And then, how long was that phase, and then what led to, what the real start of a product?
The first really interesting learning was we saw that while we had built it for kids to use, it was actually teachers who were driving the adoption, right?
Hmm.
Teachers found it, and we could see, right? Like we would, obsess over our Google Analytics in those days and just see, like, oh, there's a new user in the US or Australia or whatever. And we would always see them pop up in like a group of 25 devices in one place, and we could, we were able to connect the dots and see that teachers are, using this with kids. And so I think from that point on, a lot of our journey was really around empowering teachers, right? And what we realized is while we had set off to essentially, make kids eat their veggies from a learning point of view, right? That we thought, we'll make these veggies so tasty that they'll come and, skip the
Mm,
sweets and eat
nice
this.
analogy. Yeah.
But what we realized is, if you put somebody in with the tastiest veggies and sweets and cakes and, donuts, they will eat those
All of it.
donuts. If it's, especially if it's kids who are, yet to learn the value of, some of these, delayed gratification in the other things. And so what we
Mm.
realized is why do kids eat veggies is because their parents make them and force the kids to eat them. Right. And so if we can make that easy, right, like essentially, give the teachers a few easy recipes, then maybe that's what will really work. And so from that point on, we started building it around teachers, and that's what really led to the pivot for quizzes as well, right? Because with WizenWorld, and you had met us even in the WizenWorld days, and the big sort of bottleneck to that product's growth was that we were the gatekeepers of content, right?
Mm.
In a way, we were really limiting how much teachers could do with that product by, and we were, in our view, building it really fast. We were doing automations and whatnot. But the reality is, looking back, we had built probably like, 0.1% of what, or not even that much of what exists or probably existed on quizzes, a year later, right? Because unlocking it for teachers, and that's when really the genesis of quizzes was giving teachers a fun way to conduct an assessment with their kids, but letting them feed in the content, right? And yeah, that's sort of the seed that I think, very quickly we could see that this was really a game changer, right? Like just opening it up to teachers. And then we just followed their lead, in terms of what they asked.
At some point, I know when we met, we did a reference call with one of the teachers, I think in the UK.
Hmm.
And she used this extraordinary expression saying, they have caught lightning in a bottle. And I think at the time, Quizzes probably had 20 teachers and maybe 400 kids on
Hmm.
the platform using it. So it was probably 2 to 3 weeks old at the time. And recently I was talking with Ankit, and he said that teacher is still using quizzes and still a big core fan. So it kind of felt like something magical was happening here. And of course, when you use the product, you could see that it was just a lot of fun, and very playful in the way in which it's done, right? And of course, as I mentioned at the start of this podcast, it was you and Ankit at the time, and I think when we invested, I think you hired one engineer, and that also continued for quite some time. I mean, we used to keep saying, "Where is the rest of the team?" And I said, "Okay, we have one hire, right?" But what used to keep happening is we used to meet almost weekly, I think, at the time, and these guys would have extraordinary analytics and charts and graphs and beautiful visuals, which I think was a core competency that someone between the two of you, you all had.
Yeah, I think
Um,
Ankit is really great at
Ankit is great at that.
visualizing
Okay,
the
now
data
now
story.
we know who writes the code and who makes it look good. But I think there was something magical about how that kept working. And one anecdote is, we used to always push the team saying, "Hey, you need to start some monetization," and they would say, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, we'll do that, we'll do that." And they'd come back the next week and say, "Oh, no monetization, but we grew 30% week on week," and that would happen week after week after week, and we'd go in at the start of the meeting saying, how come you guys are not thinking about monetization? And then we'd come out of the meeting saying, wow, they're growing so fast. But I think one of the keys was you kept the team very lean
Hmm.
and your cost structure really low, right? So you were able. So tell us a little bit about that thinking, and that continued even post the Series A when Nexus came
Hmm.
in. And I think for a good 4 to 5 years,
Yeah.
you just stayed ultra lean
Hmm.
and just kept growing. Um, Share a little bit about those, the thinking there and the journey.
Yeah. So I think at least with me and Ankit, I think we always just ran it in a way that made sense to us first principles, right? So when we were, I think we saw the value in kind of the growth we were getting for the little burn we had, right? And we felt like it was a good choice to keep that running as far as we could do it. But we also realized that we weren't making any money, right? So we didn't want to throw the money away and essentially, we said let's stay lean and let's see how long we can really be a product led growth company. And we really did feel like we had the right size team to build that product, right? And I think initially we really struggled with hiring, but I think within a year or so we were around a 15-20 member team. Our second hire was a recruiter, and that helped us get to that reasonable threshold in a pretty short time. And then we felt like we have a solid team that can do this, and it was really a very young group, a lot of kids out of college. And but I think we were all really passionate about what we were building, and that worked well. And I think it allowed us to actually build even a lot of the brand we have today of, right, being very teacher first. And I think that's what carries us even till now. But yeah, it was sort of a choice based out of the constraints we had, right? Like today people, like one of our nice claims is that we grew with zero marketing and performance marketing spend. And the reason is we had no money to do performance marketing, but we found ways to then keep that growth happening. But that definitely meant that we couldn't waste money on things like that. Yeah.
So that journey, I would say through until almost the Series B, was a good 6 years.
Yeah, it's a 5 plus. Yeah. And I think the last 2 years of that 5 years, we were actually working on monetization. So, if you recall, we tried ad revenue, we tried, premium content for students, we tried even, tutoring as a service, connecting, teachers to students. We tried, even gamification, seeing if kids would pay for, like a fun element or parents would pay. So we tried a lot of things, but ultimately we settled on, what ended up being our core model, which is this subscription based revenue model where teachers and now, schools pay for, uh, access to, the full breadth of quizzes functionality.
So Deepak, maybe before we get into that phase, let's talk a little bit about the scale you all got to,
Hmm.
right? Even as a free product, I think our seed round was a little more than $500,000, and then I think the Series A round was also not that big. It was like $3.5 million
Hmm.
type of a thing. So, and you all hadn't even spent probably more than half of that, so like
Hmm.
a $2 million spend over 5 6 years
Yeah.
with an ultra lean team
Hmm.
and no marketing, but you were still seeing a lot of love with the teacher community. I remember you guys would go to SXS, SW, and the teachers would be jumping over each other, wanting to show how they were using quizzes and stuff. So, during that phase, you saw extraordinary growth, right?
Hmm.
Tell us a little bit so people understand, what scale you were operating at.
Yeah, I think, probably around uh, 4 years into it, we had gotten to, I remember, like, 3 months into our journey, we got to students solving 1 million questions on the platform, right? In
Wow.
March, which was, just around the time you were speaking. And those were, pretty insane numbers compared to what we had seen with, WizenWorld, just because it had just opened up the floodgates when we let teachers do what they wanted with it, right? But as you mentioned, right, I always look back at it as we had a very steady but consistent growth, right? So because it was largely driven through word of mouth, it wasn't that one day we were looking at it, so the growth happened, and next month we were focusing somewhere else, so it
Mm,
it
mm.
dipped. It We just really focused on building the product and rapidly improving that. uh, and that led to essentially, like every month it was a bigger base that was championing you, right? And so that compounding effect really added up over the years. And so while I don't think we ever had like a viral growth, I do feel we were able to sort of have this very steady and fairly good sort of like a monthly growth number that we were able to really maintain.
What scale in terms of absolute number of MAUs did you hit?
Yeah, so pre-pandemic we were at roughly, I think 25 million monthly active users, and uh, that is, I think, like a good, probably maybe 0.5% of the total market you can hit, and if you talk about like people with devices and all that, probably, you know, you know, 4, 5, 10% of the addressable market in those days. So, but yeah, that's where we were, and today we sit at around over 70 million monthly active users.
Wow. So maybe we can step back a little bit and explain to our listeners what does quizzes do?
Yeah, right. So, in fact, that's a thing that has evolved quite a bit
Yeah, but I'm
over.
saying at
Yeah,
that stage, right, when
yeah,
you
at
had the
that
25
stage.
million MAUs, and then we can come to
Yeah.
the
So
where it is.
at that stage, yeah, I think our, I think where quiz was really working was in the US in particular, right? Where even in those days, around half the schools in the US had teachers actively using quizzes, right? At least some teachers using our product. And so, yeah, what it did essentially was allow a teacher to conduct an assessment with their students in a really fun way, right? And now I say assessment, and a lot of people might think, when, depending on where you're from, quiz or assessment, all these things have different connotations. But essentially, it was used in multiple ways, right? It was used as a, self-paced, classwork assignment. It was used as a homework. It was used as a fun Friday activity. It was used in all these interesting ways because if you really boil down, what happens in a school, it is essentially, half of it is consuming content, which sometimes the teacher is delivering, sometimes you're reading a book, sometimes you're watching a video, and the other half is applying those learnings, which in more often than not boils down to answering a question, right? And so that's where, while it seems like such a simple idea, it actually is a thing that happens a lot in every classroom or anywhere where learning is happening, right? Is you're applying those learnings. And that's where quizzes came in essentially and became a real mainstay for a lot of teachers.
Got it. Got it. So the first phase, I would say till that 2019, 2020 phase was really ramping up the usage for in classroom for the most part, and then slowly bleeding to the home.
Mm.
And of course, one of the biggest interesting challenges you all had was people did not have connected devices in the
Hmm.
classroom. All over, I remember the state of Texas was probably the first one,
Hmm.
and or amongst the first. And we could almost draw, if you drew a timeline of where quizzes was adopted, it probably
Yeah,
mirrored,
followed that.
the
Yeah.
advent of
Hmm.
the internet into the classrooms or,
Yeah.
connected devices for children. So that was sort of the first phase, largely US focused, maybe some more, developed
Yeah.
countries having it. But you used to see extraordinary love from the students, from the teachers, you'd see Twitter stuff. So explain a little bit of how that made you all feel, right? Because none of it was necessarily solicited. People are just, like sharing their love for the product and the company.
Yeah, yeah. I think, when those, 5 years that we weren't making any money, these were probably the wins that, kept us going, right? Because numbers will only motivate you so much, uh, especially when they're, non-monetary. So, but yeah, I think, what helped us, some of the hard lessons we learned, building those games for students in the Wizen world, the year and
Mm,
a half we did that. I think that gave us a really good instinct for, what kids like, right? And it was actually very interesting because, initially you make one game and then, oh, you make something simple and it works. And your obvious next thought is make something more fancy, right? Like add more bells and whistles. And one thing we learned really early on is that actually doesn't help. you know Take a game like chess, right? It hasn't changed for, like thousands of years, right? And it's
Hmm.
still such a popular game, and it's because of the other person, right? Like that format supports, this great interaction, right? And that's kind of what we learned with quizzes as well, is really we are there to create these moments in a classroom, right? Like a moment of a kid answering a question and getting a kick out of it, a leaderboard that, brings some sort of competition. And we found ways to sort of blend, like this fun activity with something that actually, solved a lot of the core problems that teachers were grappling with, which was uh, one is, kids are just not interested in doing this boring content, right? But the moment if you just tell a kid, hey, run, it's not really fun. But if you put five kids together and say, let's see who gets to the end fastest, it's a very different feeling,
Hmm.
right? So that worked for some set of, say the competitive kids, right? Then there is a big segment of kids who are afraid of, maybe even being heard in a classroom, right?
Yeah.
This gave them a way to, engage, right? Like it's very different when a teacher says, who knows the answer to this. So always the same usual suspects that raise their hands, but this gave every kid a chance to try.
Hmm.
Okay, if they get it wrong, it'll show them a funny image and say, try again, right? And those were some of the core dynamics that really actually teachers appreciated, right? We built in, like, very organic ways for kids to who get it wrong to reattempt a question and cover for that. So it was never built as a way to label a child, but rather a way for a child to practice and, overcome some of their hesitation and, make it a lot more of an inviting experience. And I think that's what teachers also realized, and what they really appreciated was that energy that they could see, right? Both from, the toppers of the class, if if you were to put it that way, but also, the other, the main segment of the class that is often not super pumped about, academics, and they don't necessarily see it as their strength, right? But making, something that even they found enjoyable, I think was a huge unlock for teachers, because otherwise it's a lot of pressure to try to create that yourself, right? And that is one of the places I think education really solves that need of helping. I think if there's one teacher and one student, you don't need quizzes.
Hmm.
Or a lot of tech really is not needed. You can do well with
Sure.
just a whiteboard. But the moment you have five kids itself, it's almost an impossible task. Two kids itself is twice as tough. But 25, 30, 50 kids, that's when it becomes really just impossible. And that's where something, that's where technology can actually come in and help that teacher really, engage this broad group at their own level in a way. Yeah.
So that sort of summarizes the first phase.
Hmm.
Um, the second phase was, let's say, a little bit about the monetization phase or the early monetization, the experiments you all
Hmm.
did, etc. And then probably the third phase, which is now is probably just this whole advent of AI and how
Yeah.
you all have been leveraging it. And then we can talk perhaps a little bit about the future beyond that. Um, and the second phase sort of also sadly coincided with the pandemic.
Hmm.
And, you know, obviously that was a very exciting time from a
Yeah.
quizzes product and, opportunity perspective, but obviously a lot of other challenges. How did you all make the switch? I do recall one anecdote which we had discussed that, of course the parents will pay for this,
Hmm.
right? But when you tried to go down that path, you were told, well, this is only going to favor the rich kids and you should not think. So that became a sort of a non-starter. And so tell us a little bit about how, you did some experiments and how did you arrive at a viable, financial model for the company.
Yeah. So I think when it, yeah, I would say even, uh, till date, having infra devices, internet in a classroom is something that is a requirement, to really use quizzes. But I think, yeah, so the pandemic definitely, really flipped the tables in a way, because suddenly everybody had the internet and devices because they were at home. And, or if they didn't, then they were essentially not there, right? But people did, thankfully, most people were able to somehow, get, even if it's on a mobile phone, uh, access to, their kids to learn this way. And that is where I think we were also lucky that, as engineers and product builder, I don't think we ever anticipated. I mean, I'm sure we didn't anticipate a pandemic,
Of course.
but we had actually built it in a way to support these diverse needs, right? So we always built it in a way that, hey, if a kid is at home, it should work, just because I think as engineers we thought, we should support it, right? And that really served us well when the pandemic happened, because suddenly we were just ready to capitalize on that, this what we called then the new normal, right? And so teachers all over the world were able to just pick it up. And the other thing that we always focused on was quizzes should be super easy to use. Teachers should not need any sort of training, and again that helped because of all the options they had. Teachers found that quizzes at least is usable, and so it picked up like crazy, like say a typical school maybe has 50, 100, maybe a few hundred teachers. In those days I think every week we would have around 20,000 teachers sign up on quizzes, new
Wow.
teachers. And we had essentially one person doing support, and that eventually became all of us doing support with that person, because it was just crazy, right? The amount of, like, every day it's like like a couple of hundred schools are picking up
Coming
your
on board.
product
Mm.
essentially. And not and it's actually worse than a couple of hundred, because people from every country, every background you can imagine. And so it was, yeah, definitely like a very challenging, but I'd say super exciting time for all of us. Who doesn't? It's a good problem to
Plus,
have.
you also, as a
Hmm.
team, are certainly working remotely and
Yeah,
distributed and all of that
right.
stuff. So, one thing, I don't mean to say anything to jinx you all, but I've never heard anybody complain about, oh, there's some downtime at quizzes or the system is, not functioning to things, etc. Some, this is not something where a company with like 50, 60, 70 million monthly active users, right, typically will go through some
Hmm.
ups and downs. So, what did you all get right?
I think that was probably just a consequence of having engineers at the helm, right? I think we always, for whatever downsides it might have, right? It took us 5, 6 years to monetize and things like, little issues like that. But that was something we were always, very much in control of, right? And we had our eyes. I mean, we didn't have to work really hard to know what it took to have a stable system, and to, build these scalable systems came very naturally to us. And, the new team members, we were able to work with them. And because we were very frugal and all of that, right? Like, we didn't, cloud hosting wasn't an expense for us for a couple of years, right? We just managed on free credits, and
Mm, mm.
we were, I think the kind of things we were doing, though, at the scale we had, probably a lot of people would spend 5 or even 10 times, the amount on cloud hosting. But I mean, like, when you funded us, I think maybe a month before that was when we actually switched from our free tier, which was like the smallest, machine you can have, like that, whatever T1 micro instance of AWS. But till then, like, the WizenWorld was running totally on two free accounts of AWS, right? And that itself had like 50,000, registered users and all of that. So we were, I think we knew how to, build those systems, and I think we've, tried to maintain that. Yeah.
Very cool. Uh, but still these things, can be taken for granted, but they're not insignificant, right? There's the system stability and uptime. There's the data issues, data privacy. You're having learning information around, millions of children around the
Yeah.
world.
Even being able to support these many users for free, right? Like,
Yeah.
only could happen because we were quite lean. Yeah.
Very cool.
Hmm.
Very cool. So the monetization experiment started also around the same time as the pandemic when you're seeing crazy
Hmm.
growth
Yeah.
of number of users. I recall there were a couple of financing rounds that happened back to back
Yeah.
at the time, which would have also been a bit of a distraction, but probably helped. So what's the model now? What's the financial model of the company? How does it make money?
Yeah, so essentially we sell a subscription product to schools, right, and teachers. And when we first started it, soon, like, on the heels of the pandemic, pretty much, which was actually a or a thing we were working on. In fact, from the beginning, of that year,
Mm.
2020, even before the pandemic really kicked in, we had sort of decided that we will do this, subscription model, and we had timed it for basically, September of 2020, which is when schools open up in the US, right? So we said we'll be ready for it for the new school year with this subscription product. And so that, we decided also that we won't take anything away from our free product and we'll only add new things. So then we were furiously building enough so that people found value in, upgrading, and then launched it on, the timeline we had decided. And, but the great thing was, I think, from day zero, I mean, I think basically, I could say a week after we launched this product, we were profitable, and we've
Mm.
been able to be profitable since then. I think probably by the end of that year, we had recuperated all our funding till date, till that day. And, and we also had little money in the bank. So, we were in good shape and we could see a path to growing it and all of that. But yeah, essentially today, what has evolved since, 2020 is that we built out sort of the school side of this product as well, and we continue to build that. And so today, the majority of our revenue comes from schools and even sometimes governments,
Mm.
ministries of education, essentially buying quizzes to support all their teachers. Yeah.
And are all the customers, or the paying customers, still in the US, or do you have also international
So we've
customers?
actually been able to diversify that as well. And I think we're really bullish on the potential of quizzes outside of the US as well, right? So I think in our early years, I think two things have, it's been, 9+ years. So think even the world has evolved a little since then. But in those days, I think, and even till today, the US is very, is very fertile ground, I'd say, for like a product-led growth company, especially in EdTech. But the pandemic was sort of, the jolt that a lot of, I think, countries needed to look seriously at technology in the classroom, and it exposed a lot of people to the benefits as well. And so while again a lot of them went back to their old ways after the pandemic, it was still multiples more than was pre-pandemic, right? And since then we've seen a steady growth now with the advent or popularity of AI, since 2022 and 3. Even that has again forced a lot of people to think about that they need to equip their schools and students and teachers with the right technology if they expect to be relevant in the future. So I think we've had some really, I think, sort of what is very heartening to see is a lot of our success again has been on the back of this product working, right? It's not been a lot of marketing or in fact, most of our marketing efforts go into community development, right? We just try to, be there with our teachers, a lot of that helps us both learn from them of what their evolving needs are. Uh, but also, helps us create a nice buzz around, what we're doing. And that, being present at events and things like that has been, the backbone of our strategy, and even supporting teachers to actually organize learning events in their schools. And
Yeah.
that drives a lot of our growth. And a lot of say for example, one of our big success stories is a state in Brazil that pretty much exclusively uses quizzes for all their assignments and homework, and it has been a tremendous success there, right? One of the few edtech implementations that has not only met but far exceeded their expectations. And today we are in conversations with multiple other states in Brazil as well on the back of this
Mm.
success. But they've well over, I think doubled or tripled, the expectations they had in that state.
Wonderful.
And yeah, so, and now we are seeing, for example, good growth in Taiwan, for example, and in Indonesia, and UK, Canada, Australia. So while Quiz is fortunate today to actually be present in pretty much, there's not a day that goes by when at least, quiz is used in 150, distinct countries, by teachers there. And, I think, as you mentioned, right, we've always been good at growth and we're still learning, how to monetize and, find the right products. And, in different countries, though, the monetization strategy we've realized will vary, right? And while bottoms up works really well in the US, right, where teachers have a voice and they drive a lot of these decisions. But even in the US, for example, a lot of decisions are also top down, right? And so sort of getting closer to administrators and building out sort of a product that really solves important needs for them as well is something that is evolving at Quizzes, and we believe will be a big part of our global growth story. But we're already I'd say seeing 15%, 20% of our revenues coming outside of the US. Yeah.
In terms of usage, where does India stand, and
Mm.
how has the growth been in India itself? I know you all don't make a conscious effort on any specific
Yeah.
geography, perhaps other than the US. But yeah, would love to hear,
Mm. So India has been interesting. I'd say India is probably one of the countries that we've made multiple attempts at growing, like in different ways.
sure, home
Uh,
turf. Yeah,
huh?
home turf.
Yeah, of course, right? We would love to see quizzes being used more. I think quizzes, it's interesting. Like recently, I'd gone to, a sort of a young entrepreneur, budding entrepreneur event at, my alma mater BITS in Goa. And there were around 190 kids who had come for this, from schools all over India and probably, good schools, I'm guessing. Uh, and I before I spoke, I just thought I'll ask them how many of you have heard of quizzes, and I thought maybe 5, 10 will raise their hands. But interestingly, I think at least 80% of the kids raised their hands,
Nice.
and all of them said we used it during the pandemic.
Uh,
So that's, I think, maybe a summary of our sort of story here. Is I think post-pandemic, most schools have gone back to sort of the traditional ways, we pen and paper and all of that.
mm.
And I think India is still sort of finding its feet in terms of how to leverage technology. I think it gets used in a lot of other, like basically on admin and for marking attendance and maybe
Right.
sharing reports. But when it comes to actually learning, a lot of that still happens the old way. And so that's sort of my observation so far. And we've actually built out unique technologies to actually support classrooms that don't have devices. You
Mm.
might know about sort of paper mode, where essentially kids can answer questions with QR code itself, and teachers can quickly scan that. And while it works pretty well, I think it is more of a mindset thing, I feel, more than an infra thing. I think the Indian system is still sort of very uh, we are so result oriented, right? That I think what works works, and people are a little hesitant to try things, and I think for good reason, because there's so much at stake for these competitive exams and all of that. Until we have that sort of a system, I think people will tread lightly with experimenting. Whereas a lot of other countries, where say your performance on a test is only part of your say
Mm.
ticket to getting into a college, right? There is your your projects and your score in your school assessments, and so many things, that an essay and all these things that go into it. Whereas in India, it's so focused on just like sometimes one exam, right? And so people then maybe the right thing for that system is to really zone in on what that needs. Yeah.
Yeah. So last couple of years has been an interesting time also with the advent of Gen AI, and I know you used to do a lot of controlled experiments
Mm,
around it, but suddenly there was a strong impetus,
mm, mm.
and we have seen a lot of exciting demos. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how the product has evolved in this whole AI world, and in some ways, what are some of the new things y'all are working on, and
Yeah.
so on.
So I think when I think the whole world got really excited about AI when ChatGPT came out, right? I think, I don't know, early
Yeah, about a year ago,
2023.
two
Yeah.
years ago. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So uh, I think we saw that, and I think all of us realized that, if we don't be at the forefront of this wave, then we'll, be going under, right? That wave. And, that still, I think, is a very strong sentiment at quizzes today, right? Where I think a few months after that, we essentially, sort of, listed down all these ways that AI can, support, what we're doing at Quizzes. And I don't think there was anything where AI didn't feel like it could be a game changer,
Mhm.
right? Whether it's creating content, whether it's adapting content that's there, whether it's grading, whether it's, student support, whether it's differentiation, like literally everything that a teacher has to do uh, can be supported by AI. And in many cases, like there's no way where, AI is not going to come in there. And I think it again stems from, the core problem of one teacher has to cater to 30, 40, 50 kids, right? And that is, impossible for a human to do, right? And that's where we believe, AI is going to make a huge impact in all these aspects. And so I think a big part of our early journey was around content creation and, building, this AI tool like functionality in a way that empowered a teacher to adapt what they are
Mhm.
doing, right? It wasn't really, again, like while in the early days and, even now, I think AI does a great demo, right? Like you can make a video that's mind, like with Sora, these AI generated
Mhm.
videos are mind blowing, right? A lot of these, but ultimately, it's not that that video is like the ad that you put out at the Super Bowl, or even on TV,
Yeah.
right? There is a lot of work to get it ready. And I think we all see that in a couple of years, that'll probably all be different, right? But today, and when AI, even in 2023, I think our realization was that we need to help teachers to use AI. Right? That's again,
Got it.
what is the need, because it's only a teacher who will be able to make it fit the syllabus. It's only a teacher that's going to be able to know what, a kid who is struggling really needs to be seeing, or what they need in their class tomorrow. And, I think we believe that quizzes is really in a sweet spot because we've got these millions of users and we've got this technology that really needs them to make it work.
Mm.
And as we get better, I think we'll use those learnings to make it better and better, and we'll see how things evolve. But really today, that's what we are pumped about, right? Is how do we make this work for teachers and leverage their help to actually bring this to a classroom, right? Because today it's not that anybody is making their textbook from AI, right? This textbook is still there, and it's about using AI to pick from there and create an assessment, create a lesson plan for tomorrow. And that's where we are focused on what can save teachers time and leveraging their judgment to know where to pick up the reins from AI and take things into their own hands. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd seen some early demos of, point to a YouTube video
Yeah.
and then you can use the quizzes database to, like, if it's a topic on American history or
Yeah.
something like that, then, you can read the video and then immediately look at your database
Yeah.
and come up with an
Match
awesome,
something
relevant
relevant.
quiz and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
Very cool. So that's sort of the journey so far, which has obviously been super exciting and thing. It was fascinating as I was entering the building to see six-floor building, almost all the floors having quizzes on them, and it's been quite a journey. But of course, the best is yet to come. So, what is the strategic direction in which you see quizzes evolving?
Yeah. So I think, in fact, the biggest change that we've been working on for the past, in fact, year or two, right, is that, we've realized that we've, built a core competency in terms of how to make how to bring technology, make it accessible for a teacher and a student, right? And uh, we started, and I think there's a lot of depth in the quiz assessment practice space, but we're also looking at how do we support other jobs to be done, right? Like how do we take a lesson and make that something that is enjoyable for a student to
Hmm.
consume, and
Hmm.
that allows a teacher to maybe take a maybe what would otherwise be a one-way broadcast and pull students into that experience, right? So delivering instruction, different modalities of learning, right? Like sometimes you learn from text, right? Like a passage or an article. Sometimes you learn by watching a video. So how do we support these formats? And again, you know bring that fun element and that interactive element to it, so that even if they are veggies, at least they're made, lightly fried and a little
Yeah,
tasty.
as tasty as you can
Yeah.
make them. Yeah.
Right. And so that's been a lot of the last year of our journey is, supporting new formats, supporting really all the ways in which a teacher, tries to deliver instruction. And then, sort of that whole, how we describe it as, the a teacher, they have an I do, a we do, and a you do, right? So first the teacher does it, right? I
Mhm.
do it. I'll show you how it's done. And there again, you can bring a bit of interactivity into that as well, right? So that you're not just, having kids zone out after 30 minutes of somebody talking to them. But, pop in a little question, little interactive activity so that, they are pulled back into the instruction. Then there is the we do, where a teacher is maybe going through a problem and
Mm.
showing them how it's done, and then handing slowly, giving the reins to the kids, but, supporting it. And then there is the you do, where a teacher says, okay, now, do your best. And that's when a teacher needs basically eyes and ears on what's happening, right? And again, it's a thing where quizzes can help, right?
Yeah.
Where 40 kids doing, their own assignments on their own screens, a teacher can kind of see which five kids really need help and go work with them, whereas the kids who are, doing really well quizzes, and that too, and now with the help of AI, can actually maybe give them another assignment. And the kids who are, sort of, on track, it works for them. And now a teacher can just be free of all of that
Yeah.
and focus on these five kids, which no AI can teach, where they really need to not just show them the material, but probably, work with them emotionally as well, right? Like encourage them a little, give them a little treat to, get them to, give something a try, which, they probably feel like they
Yeah.
can't do. Yeah.
And I also notice you've added like accommodations and
Yeah.
lots of capabilities in the product as well.
Yeah, right. A
So
lot of ways for teachers to support the varied learning needs and the ways that students want to, express themselves. So, universal design for learning, accommodations, these are things that, again, we really believe tech is a big enabler for it. And I think we see ourselves as being at the forefront of that wave as well. Yeah.
cool. So, look, I think all this has been awesome. Maybe you can talk a little bit as we wrap up on the culture of the team, the company, how we all have fun. How you stay so close to the customer despite being, neither the prototype customer nor in the same geography.
Yeah.
And a little bit about you and Ankit have become avid runners. The culture that's come into the company around that. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So I think one of the big unlocks for us early on, was really how if we just listen to teachers, a lot of problems get solved. Or, listen to our users, teachers, students, or, now even admins and principals. So I think that has really been close to our hearts, right? Even when we hire and look for people who will be leaders, we look for people who have internalized that, right? That if you're guided by your users and not by, trying to do something cool or showing them how it's done, it is really, a service mindset in that sense. And I think we invest a lot in terms of opening up new channels, right? I think being a, product development company largely, sitting out of India, and, I think we've in fact gotten a lot of leverage from actually having some people on the ground as well, right? We have a sizable, marketing and, sales team in the US that keeps bringing, and most of those people are actually people who were teachers earlier,
Mm.
and we've intentionally tried to keep it that way. Uh, and so we, like being close to our customer is something we very actively work on, right? So we've, you know, every year I think we come up with new ways to get, evolving it for our evolving company as well, right? When there were 20 of us, we were all very, every ticket everybody knew about, right? Because support person would make sure that, that happened. And I think more than a support, I think they acted as a champion for users, right? And we all really listened also. And, so that was our main channel, for example, right? Even from day zero, we would work all day and then we'd be up at night doing support chats, and that gave us most of our early conversations. And, the person you spoke to in those
Mm-hmm.
days, we had that person because, they had connected with us over this, for a support query.
Yep.
Right. And so, but over the years, like as we got bigger, we realized, hey, we need to find a way to get the aggregated opinions also of people, right? We'll never, support is good to know their pain points today, but what do they want tomorrow, right? Like, so then we made like a forum where teachers would vote on what they wanted, and, so you'll put an idea and others can vote on it, right? So now we have this great resource where we can see what are the top requests from teachers, aggregated over months and years now.
Yep.
Similarly, then we started having calls with users, right? So that unlocked a lot for our, earlier we never had calls, weirdly enough, right? For the first couple of years, you would, for all the talk about customer centricity, it was all through support interactions, right? But then as we started, building more, we started wanting to go deeper and understanding, how the systems work there, and that unlocked the next level of growth for us, right? The next set of functionality, where a lot of our current strategy and wins have come from is conversations with teachers, right? So that's a big thing. Now again, like as we get more resources, we are able to do more, right? So now we partnered with a lot of schools where our team goes and actually observes the classroom, and they learn a lot of things about the practical realities of being in a class, right? Sometimes we think that we'll build this great functionality and teachers will use it this way and that way, and then we go to a classroom and all that is demolished, when we see what, just to get the kids to sit down they took 10 minutes, and now
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking that they will make them jump all these hoops, and it's not practical. So I think that's one core aspect of our culture, I think, is just how do we keep being close to our users. And now with users in different countries, and we've actually today we have people, I think, in 8 countries now, right? And we hope to build further inroads that way. So that's a big part. I think the other
So I'll
core, yeah.
pause you there.
Hmm.
There's one particular metric that everybody looks at, which is NPS,
Hmm.
right? And what has the history of quizzes NPS been, and what is it at now, and how low did it ever go?
Yeah, I think upper 70s is the lowest we've gone. I think today we hover at around 80 NPS. And yeah, I think something we are always proud of, but I think something we always say, we always feel like, we are a bit skeptical about that number. And so we're always trying to say, "Oh, let's get it higher," because we see
I
so many
recall when
gaps.
it once dropped. He's being very humble here. It was never below 80 for the longest time. It once dropped to 77, and the two of them almost had tears in their face, saying, "Our NPS has dropped, has crashed, or whatever." And I think most companies would give an arm and a leg to have a 77 NPS. And kudos to you guys for being so focused and obsessed with making customers happy, especially when you have both the teachers and the students. And to me, one of the most gratifying things is to see some tweets where kids are tweeting, "Oh, today is quizzes day." Yeah, right. So, um, Deepak, you and Ankit have done an extraordinary job. I think at a time when the world says EdTech isn't the place to be, I think you have stuck through an incredible time and come out, even stronger. So kudos to the entire team at Quizizz and to you, the two of you, for your thought leadership and silent, extraordinary execution. And we're of course rooting for bigger things for Quizizz in the future. So congrats and all the best. Thank you.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners Podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.